So, in effect, what are we going to do today? Beautiful. All right, in effect, what are we going to do today? Well, I'm looking at typical Power BI desktop. Power BI desktop. I'm looking here, you may remember our previous webinars that you have three views. One is your reporting view, allows you to canvas. So I'm here looking at my, where I can actually place visuals for all my reports. Reports is really a collation of visuals that are listed over a series of pages. So I'm looking here at three possible pages which have been used to actually hold or to be used as placeholders for my visuals. And it is these combinations of pages that together make my overall report. And again, also in my report view, I'm also able to see various panels. For example, here we have our visualizations panel, and visualizations panel allows me to look at the standard visuals that get installed or that come with Power BI, or if you should want to use any customized visuals, you have this three-dot ellipsis, and in the three-dot ellipsis, you can actually get more visuals either from the marketplace, Microsoft Marketplace, or maybe from a file that you may have on your computer. Also below the visuals, there are three tabs here, one denoting fields, one denoting the format, one denoting analytics. So under the fields, depending on which visualization is selected, you are able to insert certain field types of information. And also for the particular visual that is selected, if you wish, you could actually go into the format painter. And then in the format painter, you are able to select certain formatting settings. And also you can perform some analytics. And next to the right, we have the fields panel. And the fields panel will actually display all the tables with the respective fields that make up your data model, and which are therefore used to propagate, to be propagated by the visuals against your canvas. So this is a listing of all the fields that would have been selected. Now, in addition to our report view, we have our data view, and the data view actually gives us the ability to see our data in a tabular form. And here we can see when I look at my various fields, so if I were to select my sales, for instance, here's my sales related data that would have been imported. And the next view would be our model view. And the model view is really used to put in a diagrammatical form or in a pictorial form all the tables and views that would have been selected and which form the basis of our data model. And from here, you're able to look at all the various relationships between our tables. So from our relationships with our tables, we can therefore now go into our visualization. So how do we, get something like this, all of this running? So what I'm going to be demonstrating today, as a follow-up to our previous webinar sessions, I'll be opening a session of Power BI and we'll be importing the data. And as we are importing the data, we'll be going through some steps which you would have been familiar with in previous sessions. Steps which include, for instance, transforming the data, cleaning the data, what needs to be done when you have to clean your data, to review your data to determine if the data is suitable for use. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. So here, I'm opening another session of Power BI. So you'll notice, therefore, in this session, when I should click my 3 views, they're all blank because there's nothing that has been selected. I also can see across from my visualizations, I do have my visualizations available, but if I should expound my fields panel, there are no fields which are displayed because really no data has been accepted or no data has been imported. So the first thing we have to do is right here under the Home tab for this ribbon, you'll notice that there's this button which says Get Data. Now I can just click the drop down, and when I click the drop down, I get a listing of what is known as common data sources. However, there's a possibility that my data source that I need to connect to bring in my data might not be an Excel worksheet or Power BI data set or data flows or a text file or a web. So in that context, I could actually click the More button, and the More button, once clicked, will bring up another window, which allows me to get data based on a larger data set options. And your data options would be grouped. So for instance, if I should highlight all, these are now a listing. So it's a much larger listing of all the data types that Power BI Desktop is able to connect to and to import data into the system. However, if you wanted to search in a more categorized manner, you could search by way of data which is file related, which mainly tends to be text files, or maybe database, where there's some kind of a SQL database, maybe SQL Server or an Access database, and even an Oracle database, or some of the more popular open source databases, which is, for instance, MySQL database and PostgreSQL. So for me and for our demo today, we'll be looking at an Excel workbook. So I could highlight the Excel workbook. And once I highlight that I'm not going to be using an Excel workbook, I can click the Connect button. And in clicking the Connect button, the system now will bring up the open, allows me to search on my machine using a file and Excel. Bring up for I'll tell you that data source, sample data source, and download for free from the internet. So if you learn how to use the Power BI Desktop tool and just type download Power refers that do the data that you can download. So here I'm selecting the AdventureWorks sales. This is a regular process that you know when you're now importing data. So we're going to be making the assumption that our data source, we know nothing about it. You will recognize that it's recommended that when you open this data source, we expect some kind of transformation on that data, right? So therefore, you're going to check if there are extreme values or if there are maybe values which are irrelevant to our analysis or BI analysis and so forth. So I've highlighted the AdventureWorks sales Excel spreadsheet, and then I click open. So you'll see a couple of messages, and then you will now see a navigator window. So let's interpret this Excel data. Remember, an Excel file is really a workbook file. And this workbook file may have one or several worksheets. Good. So again, with an Excel file, the entire file is called a workbook file. So in this case, the AdventureWorks sales.xlsx file, it's actually a workbook file, where the workbook file is the collection of worksheets. So we see several number of worksheets here. So what we can actually do is to select the various worksheets that we would want, or maybe to select all. And therefore, as you are selecting your worksheets, you have a browser window on the right-hand side, which allows you to look at your data. So it is always good practice whenever you are selecting your tables to use the browser to say, okay, is my data, does it look good enough, or is it possible that I might have to do some amount of data transformation? So for the purpose of our example, we will import all, excuse me, all our worksheets. So I'm selecting them all. Good. So I've selected all. Now, once I've selected my data set, I have now three options available to me. One, on the extreme right, I could actually cancel, which would therefore cancel the entire process of data selection. But I also have two other buttons that I could actually select. One called load and one which is called transform data. And what's the difference between the two? If you are reasonably satisfied that the data in which you're going to import, that data is relatively clean, that there are no issues with that data, you probably do not need to do any browsing to check on the validity of the data, then you can actually just click load, and in clicking load, the data will actually come straight into the Power BI, right, into the Canvas area for you to use to develop your reports. But it is good practice if you are getting data from a source that you're not familiar with, then you actually move into transform data. And by selecting transform data, the data is brought into what is called the Power BI query editor. So I'm now selecting let's just give it a moment or two. So here we're getting some messages that it's processing the queries. And there are some automatic transformations that are usually conducted so that the system, will look at the fields which look like date fields, etc. So it will classify the fields as date fields or as strings, etc. So what has happened here? You'll notice at the top that the heading is now the Power Query Editor. So the Power Query Editor is not the desktop. So you can see the Power BI desktop is actually here behind the Power Query Editor. So what is a Power Query Editor used for? Well, the Power Query Editor, as I said, is used mainly for you to bring in data from a data source that might be unfamiliar to you, but you want to look at that data to do some kind of a transformation and the necessary transformation. So let's review our data, for example. So I'm looking here at customer, right? So I'm seeing here a list, looks like it's the customer name, and here I'm looking at a date field, so I'm seeing date, which is listed in different types of formats, and also information on product, and maybe a reseller. So let me give you an idea of one example of transfer in bringing in this data and that customer, which is the customer name, has both the first name and the last name. But what if for the purpose of our example, we probably wanted customer into two columns? The first, and the question is, can this be done easily? I'm going to show you this as a transformation process. Before I do, please note that the applied steps, there are 3 applied steps here. And I just want you to remember the number 3 because we'll come back to it later. If we weigh the names of the customers into 2, then we recognize that what we could do is to split it based on the space. So there seems to be a single space in between names. So I could actually just right-click the customer column, and you'll see here an option which says split column. Choose as an option in splitting the column by delimiter or by the number of characters. For instance, if I want to split based on the first 10 characters, etc., or by positions. So these are all the options. But I want to split by a delimiter because I'm saying that there is a space that is for every customer's first and last name. They split by delimiter. And then here, I have different options. So I'm saying here that I want to split my customer column based on the occurrence of space. And I could say in splitting the column, I could use the leftmost delimiter, rightmost, or each. Now, why I use each occurrence of the delimiter, it's because of this. If there was somebody's name that had more than 1 spaces, then I'd end up with 3 columns. But I just want to value from left to delimiter, and wherever I find a space in between the names, then the column is split. So I selected leftmost delimiter and clicked OK, and there it is. So you'll notice that I now have 1 column which has now been split into 2. So the customer column has now been split into customer 1 and customer.2, where customer 1 has the customer's first name and the customer 2 column has the customer's last name. So that is one transformation or one transforming activity. But note what happened here, the applied steps. Remember, I said note the number 3. Good. In that there were 3 applied steps just prior to splitting the columns. So therefore, step 4 and step 5 were responsible. These were 2 steps, steps 4 and 5, the results of which was to split type. So therefore, the customer column was split in spacebar, and the types were changed to text. So if you find that you did a step or you applied a step which you probably changed your mind and you said, listen, I don't like that step again, I'm going to reverse it. You can simply delete the steps in the applied. So to the left is the delete icon, so I come by delimiter. And then deleting the split column, you will notice that customer.1 and customer product to will actually be removed, and what we will get is the original customer column. And there you go. Good. So the applied steps box, and look at all the actions that you have done to your data before you import the data to be used within your visuals in Power BI. Now, before we get to the Power BI, there are some other visuals that I would like to show you. It is all to use your view as a means of checking your data. And the three most popular or most recommended options to use are the column quality, the column profile, and the column distribution. That box looks at the quality of your data and in preview mode and makes any recommendation or highlights any data that it might consider to be bad. So if I click the column quality, you'll notice here. So Power BI, the Power Query editor, went through each column, looked at the data, and wherever it's an error, or if there's a field which is empty, it will actually do the calculations and display. So therefore, you, in looking or evaluating these metrics, can determine if you probably need to do any additional work. Those cells which have possible values with errors, or maybe those cells which are empty. Do you delete the entire row, or do you insert records within them? So that's the purpose of the column quality. But there's also one which is called the column distribution. So if I should select and now see how my data, so I'm able to my data is distributed. So I say, for instance, but 34 of which are unique. Right? So there's a difference between the distinct as against those which are unique. 34 unique means that these are 34 standalone or unique. They're only found in their once. However, the 213 distinctly means that this column. Also, we have what is called the column profile. So I would highlight the column profile. And here we're seeing some column statistics and value distribution. So when I highlight the various columns, I'm seeing certain statistical information for the column that is highlighted. So I'm able to look to see probably if there are some outliers in my data, or if there's some data which should not be in there, and therefore I'm able to make the necessary adjustments. So these are just three of the data transforming tasks which are done under the view menu, where you use it to determine the quality of your data that is going to be imported. So you look at things, as I said, like the column distribution, the column profile, and the column quantity. Once you are finished, you can just remove the check marks, and there they are. So we're saying that the data looks reasonable, the data looks good. So once we have finished with the transformation or the transforming of our data, we want to now bring this data into our Power BI. And how do you do that? You click the home button, and under the home button, you'll see that there is an action button which is called Close and Apply. So the Close and Apply, what it does is that it now brings the data and writes it to the Power BI environment so it now can be used. So I'm going to now hit close and apply. And in hitting close and apply, you'll now see load. So the data is now being loaded to be used in Power BI. And we need to just give it a minute. So I've gone through a transforming process and it's reading the data and loading. So the data will now be displayed for use. And all of this takes place here in this view, report view. So you may remember when we just started, we had an empty canvas. We still have an empty canvas. But what has changed? Well, the fields panel, which was originally empty, now has data, the fields listing in it. So here will be the table and the various fields which are selectable for the table. So this is one of the differences that has now occurred once the data is loaded. So our fields panel now has a list of tables with the respective fields. But let's look at the other views, because we said with the 3 views which are available, the second view, which is called the data view. So if I should now click data, I now see that the data that I had imported into the Power Query editor and would have conducted the various transformations against that data, I'm now able to import this data, which now becomes part of my data model. So now my data is now imported into Power BI, and here it is. But interestingly, there's a third view that I'd like to look at, which is called the model view. And what does a model view show us? So I will now collapse the properties window. So here we're seeing on the model view is a listing of all of the tables which would have been selected in the Power Query editor and brought into our Power BI environment. And as you see here, the model view, in other things you're able to is the relationship between tables. So relationships can either be a one-to-one relationship, as you see here, or it can be a one-to-many relationship, or it can be from a many-to-many relationship. Yes, Paul, you should hover over this link and you'll notice that there's a number 1 right beside the sales order data and the number 1 as well beside the sales data. By just placing the mouse over the link, you'll notice that it highlights the fields in both tables that are related. So it is saying here that there's between the sales order data and the sales data table, that's a sales order data table and the sales data, there is a one-to-one relationship between both these tables, and the fields upon which this relationship has been created is a sales order line key, because it's highlighted, and the summation, the sales order line key in both tables. So there is a one-to-one relationship. But let's look at the sales territory. You'll notice that this relationship is a bit different. It doesn't have an arrow going on either side. It actually has an arrow moving into the direction of this asterisk, which means many. So between the sales territory table, if I should hover over the link, and the sales data table, we are saying that there's a one-to-many relationship between the sales territory table and the sales data table, and it is using the sales territory key. And what does that mean? It means that for every one occurrence, there's only one occurrence of a sales territory key, but that one occurrence in the sales territory table can be found many times in the sales territory key field in the sales data table. Now let's do a little bit more on this. If I should double click the link, Power BI will actually now bring up the edit relationships window where you're able to see more comprehensively the relationship between the two tables. So the relationship between the sales data table and the sales territory table, we can see here that this is a many-to-one relationship, and it's a many-to-one relationship between the fields that have been identified, which are the sales order line key, in the case of sales data, and the sales territory key, in the case of the sales territory data. You'll notice also that there's a checkbox here which says make this relationship active. Now, why is this so? There can only be one active relationship between two tables. If there are more than one relationships, the relationship that is active is displayed with a solid line. However, the relationship which is not active is displayed with a dotted line. Good? So here's a relationship between the sales order table and the sales underscore data table, but that relationship is not active. Right? It is not the main or the primary relationship. Good? So that is how you interpret relationships between tables. So now that we have a good idea in terms of our model view and looking at all the tables which are related in our model view, and again in our data view, as we are looking at all our data, we can now go back to our report view. And I'd like to, before we design it, let's look at the example that we had before. You may remember when I started, I showed you this example where I said the report consists of many visuals. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 visuals, right? Where the visuals are assigned to different pages. So it is the combination of pages which contains these visuals that make up our report. So to get an idea of the kind of visuals that are being used, you can easily just highlight the visual. And in highlighting the visual, you'll notice that there are some boxes or some borders which therefore are displayed around the visual. And then depending on the visual that is highlighted, if you should look in the visualizations panel, you'll also see the visual that is selected being highlighted. So in this case, the visual that we selected is actually the matrix visual in the visualizations panel. So if we should probably select another visual here, you'll notice that what is highlighted, right, in the visualizations panel is actually an error chart. And we all know what an error chart is. So we have an error chart here. And now with this visual that is highlighted in the visualization, it's a map. So therefore, we are able to put data within this visualization, and dependent on what is selected, the actual country or region is highlighted. And then fourthly, we have another visualization. And that visualization It's called a slicer. So here's a slicer that is highlighted. So now that we have that, you know what you could actually do? You could actually use an already built report with its dashboard and use it as a reference point. So now that we know what this looks like, let us see if we can duplicate this particular visual, which we said is the matrix visual, and if we can therefore bring the data. So we're actually going to use the settings that's here and actually use it to build our visual. So if I go back to our blank canvas and look, you will see here that here's the matrix, right? This is the matrix visual. Now, before you select a matrix, it is always good practice to first highlight any white or blank area on the canvas before you actually select the visual. So I've selected it, just clicked anywhere on my canvas because no visual has yet been inserted. So I'm going to now highlight matrix. And here we have our matrix. Good. So I'm actually repositioning our matrix and doing this. So there's no data assigned to our matrix. Good. But let us look at our example and follow and see if there's anything we can see here. So back to our example, we're highlighting our matrix. And in highlighting our matrix, I can go to the fields setting to get an idea on how this data is displayed. So you'll notice under rows, I have two fields which are displayed. A field called category and a field called business type. Good. And because I'm able to show multiple fields, the data will therefore be grouped by way of rows. So here I am, we're recognizing that we're selecting the category as well as the business type as our rows. And where would they come from? Well, we notice that the business type comes from the reseller table and the categories comes from the product table. So going back, good. So here is our visual. Good. So from the product table, so I click to expand the table and I can do one of the following. I can click and hold on category and drag it on the rows. Good. So here I have my categories under the rows section. Now going back, let's look and see what else is there. Category and business type. And the business type, we said, can be found under the reseller. It is. Can be found under the reseller table. So I go here again. So under the reseller table, there is the word business type. That's a field. So I can actually click, hold, and drag and place it underneath the category. So the data will be first grouped by category, and then within each category, there will be a subgrouping, and the subgrouping for each category will be by the business type. So already we're seeing, if you should expand, good. So the categories, the bikes, the clothing, and the components are actually the categories. And I'm able to prove that by just deleting the business type. And you'll notice it only lists for me accessories, bikes, clothing, and components. These are the four categories. And how can I prove that? If we go into data and highlight, a bit further here, right? The categories come from the product, right? In just selecting the category, let's look at this. I'm going to product. So there are my fields, my field list, and the category will be all my categories. There you go. Accessories, bikes, clothing, components. These are the 4 unique names within our data set. So hence, we see accessories, bike, clothing, components. But as we said, we also want to include the business type. So by subgrouping the business type, I'm now able to get, for example, under the bikes category, I have the following business types: specialty bike shop, value-added reseller, or warehouse. And for clothing, I have specialty bike shop, value-added reseller, warehouse, etc. So in designing our matrix, we not only need to define the rows, as in the case of our example, which was the category and the business type, but if we should use as a reference point again, this or matrix table, you'll notice that the values, there's a value filled in for sales amount, and that field comes from a table called sales. So sales amount comes from sales. So if we should go back and then look at our values here, as we said, from the sales amount, and by the way, when you say a sigma summation, it means that this is a numeric field which can be added. So the sales amount, we can click and hold and drag over to values. Good. So our data now looks a little bit more presentable. So if we look on this, our data, and then if we should look on the example, they look a little bit different, don't you think? For example, one of the things we note is that in addition to showing data, it also shows what is called bar charts. So in order to get this kind of feature or functionality, you have to do what is called conditional formatting. So that's the additional thing that we're going to learn today, conditional formatting. So let's look. If I should go back to my data, we're going to be conditionally formatting the sales amount. But before we do that, what we're going to do is to enlarge our sales amount column. So I will widen this, and again, enlarge our sales amount column. So we want to insert a conditional formatting, where the conditional formatting will actually include a bar graph or a bar chart across the values. And how is this done? Well, we make sure that our matrix is highlighted, and with the values property, where we're using the sales amount, we click the drop down arrow, and right up near the top, we see conditional formatting. So there are different types of conditional formatting options which are available to you, and we're going to do 3 of them today. You can actually apply a background color, you can apply a font color, or you can look at data bars. So we'll be looking at data bars. So if you highlight data bars, then a data bars window will actually be displayed. And what is it saying? The heading, as the heading suggests, this is the data bars for the sales amount field. And we're saying here that for our conditional formatting, we want to use the lowest value as a minimum and the highest value as a minimum. If you don't want to use value, you can actually create a custom criteria, but we will keep it to the lowest value. Good. And you can actually say, let us choose a color icon. Let's see which one could we use. Let's say for negative values. All right, let's just keep this. And then for positive values, let's. So because we did not use custom, but rather chose the lowest value, right? The Power BI will look at the lowest value in the sales amount and also look at the highest value in the sales amount. But if we were to enter and put a custom, if we were to select custom, then after selecting custom, we would have to enter a value here for the minimum. And if we did the same for maximum, we'd enter a value. So now that we have said that we're going to include data bars, we can now click OK, and there it is. So our data looks a little bit now presentable. So remember, we say a picture tells 1,000 words. So by using data bars, the data bars is able to give you in picture format the presentation of the data, in addition to numerical values. So that is one of the conditional formats, which are conditional format options, which are available to you. So I'd like to show you another conditional format option. Again, it will be based on the sales amount. So we make sure we highlight our visual. And again, to the values, we're going to click drop down. Again, before we do any additional conditional formatting, let's remove whatever conditional formatting is already there. So because we applied data bars as a conditional format, you'll notice that data bars is highlighted. But what we're going to do, we're going to select all. And the select all will therefore remove all conditional formats from the sales amount field. And this time, we're going to reapply a conditional format, and we're going to say, let's use a background color for example. So the background color format allows us now to set how the colors are graded, gradient, if you wish, or solid colors for all values. So we can choose to use either rules or a field value or a color scale. And we'll only demonstrate the color scale today. And we're saying that we're using or we're formatting by color scale when we use just the values only, not the totals, but the values. And it's going to be based on the sum of the sales amount. And we're using summation up. We're not average, minimum, or maximum, but actually the sum. So now that we have answered the relevant questions in the top area, what is important here is the minimum to maximum. So you'll know have and would use at its highest value. And because I used the background color, we're saying that the value that is lowest will have a pale colored white color. But as the values increase up to its maximum, then those will be darker. Values increase and they get darker. You will see different shades of blue, different shades of blue on your visual. So we'll just select these as a default, click OK. There you notice. So you'll notice that it is the value of 94 million, which has the data. So as we expand, you see. So this is another conditional formatting option. So remember, before you use the bars, depending on the value, the sales value of the line, right? The value of the sales line in relation to the total sales. And here now is another conditional format where we're actually formatting the background. What I'd like to show you, another formatting option. So let's go again. Again, we're removing all. And we're going to look at another conditional format. And this conditional format option that we're going to be using now is the font color. In other words, the color that is used to write the values themselves. Good. And for the sake of time, we'll just take these defaults. So we're actually saying we're using this color scaling again. And based on the values which are listed, right? The relative weight of the values will take the colors. That is, so if I should click OK, they will notice. So the heavier weight, those values which are actually larger. And that is how you do conditional formatting. So we're running out of time. So just to recap what we did today, we brought in some sample data that we're able to download. That best practice suggests that when you're downloading data, that this data must not just be loaded, but you must go through some kind of a transforming process. And in transforming the data, we actually demoed one of the transforming processes, which was to split data or split column. And in splitting the column, we're able to separate first name from last name. We also applied other formatting to look at the data profile and the data distribution and to look at the data quality. And after doing that, we then brought in our data into the report where fields were listed in our fields panel. And from there, we demonstrated how to use the matrix visual, where the matrix visual allows you to create rows and which are able to group and subgroup your data. And then based on the rows, you're able to display values, right? Data values, in which case we chose the sales amount, and then we were able to demonstrate conditional formatting. And we introduced 3 types of conditional formats: the background color, the DRs. So we hope that you were and we just we know that your time does that you truly enjoyed the remember. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at operations@optimus.guru, and you can speak to either Macarena or to Gabriel. They'll be more than willing to assist you with whatever questions that you may need. So, on behalf of Mr. Hector Negron, the CEO, Managing Director of Optimus, I want to say thank you again for attending this webinar, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.